Tonight on NewsWatch, the fate of Flight 370. Malaysian officials are now confirming the missing plane went down. More on the location and what led crews there.
Plus, Hobby Lobby heads to the High Court. A look at its fight for religious freedom.
And CBN News sits down with author Joel Rosenberg, a man some call a modern-day Nostradamus. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. After more than 2 weeks of searching, has missing Flight 370 finally been found? Good evening. I'm Mark Martin.
And I'm Heather Sells. Malaysian officials are confirming tonight that the missing plane crashed, leaving no survivors. And now that they know the jet went down in the southern Indian Ocean, authorities are quickly trying to piece together what actually happened to Flight 370. Caitlin Burke has more in tonight's top story.
In a press conference heard around the world, Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak confirmed today the fate of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 and its 239 passengers.
It is with deep sadness and regret that I must inform you that according to this new data, Flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
Just before the Prime Minister spoke, family members of the passengers were informed by a short text message from Malaysian Airlines. It read, "We have to assume beyond any reasonable doubt that MH370 has been lost and that none of those on board survived." This new certainty over the fate of the missing plane comes after an analysis of new satellite data by British company Inmarsat. They were able to shed more light on the path of Flight 370 and zero in on its last position. Floating debris was spotted in that same area, about 1,500 miles off Australia's coast. Search planes and ships are now on their way.
The first, a grey or green circular object, and the second, an orange rectangular object.
Now that authorities believe they've located Flight 370, the search is on to find its black box and hopefully some answers.
The real answers to the mystery of this airplane crash lie 700 miles back to the west, wherever the airplane hit the water at the bottom of the ocean.
The batteries run out in about 5 days. This morning, the U.S. Navy announced that it's sending a black box locator to the region to help in the search. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Here at home, the battle over gay marriage is taking center stage in Michigan. A federal appeals court has temporarily stopped the distribution of marriage licenses to gay couples there. That decision came less than a day after licenses were first given to same-sex couples. On Friday, a federal judge ruled Michigan's voter-approved ban on gay marriage unconstitutional. The state's attorney general is seeking a stay on that decision pending an appeal. The temporary hold will be in place while the court decides whether to grant that stay.
Religious liberty versus the president's health care plan. A case pitting the two against each other is heading to the Supreme Court tomorrow. Some say the contraception mandate in Obamacare forces Christian business owners to pay for things they do not believe in. Paul Strand brings us the story from the White House.
Hobby Lobby's owners have lived out their religious beliefs through it for decades, like keeping all Hobby Lobbies closed on Sundays. They're in court because they say Obamacare will force them to cough up coverage for drugs and devices that basically abort life at its earliest stage in the womb.
Those opposed to Hobby Lobby say if the Supreme Court rules for the company, it's basically saying that businesses, not just people, have religious rights, and that's nonsense. But the Green family, who started Hobby Lobby, say as the owners, if they have to pay for contraceptives that kill potential life, well, that's a direct violation of their religious conscience.
Attorney Lori Wyndham at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty has been fighting for the Greens against the dictate Hobby Lobby must cover 20 forms of contraception,
including 4 drugs and devices that could terminate a human life, and that's something that the Greens cannot pay for in good conscience. If you do not comply with this, then you're looking at penalties that very quickly run into the millions of dollars.
One of the nation's top secularists says Hobby Lobby's desire to be free of giving its workers what Obamacare guarantees them is just wrong.
Should that one employer's religious belief trump each one of the individual 10,000 employees' religious beliefs?
Edwina Rogers says imagine the chaos if every employer can claim his religion exempts him from Obamacare's mandates.
What if that employer happens to be a Jehovah's Witness and they're opposed to blood transfusions? My daughter's alive today because she got a blood transfusion. What if the employer is Christian Scientist and they believe that you shouldn't have access to any type of modern health care, that you should only be praying to their God?
Wyndham says Hobby Lobby only wants to be free of having to cover the 4 drugs and devices that can terminate an unborn life. And even then, all its employees could still go buy them themselves.
They have a right to access all different forms of contraception, even those that could take a human life, and this case isn't going to change that. What's at stake here is whether the government can force the Green family to be the ones who provide those things.
But Rogers argues Hobby Lobby's owners won't actually be taking money out of their pockets to buy these contraceptives.
Legally, technically, they're not paying for it because when you work, you have salary, you have your fringe benefits, which usually includes health insurance and maybe life insurance, but that's part of your compensation. It is owned by you as an employee. If you weren't there working, earning it, it wouldn't exist.
Wyndham couldn't disagree more and believes the Greens face great harm.
This is a basic religious freedom case. Does a family still have their religious freedom when they open a family business? Or can the government come in, take that freedom away, and force them to do things that violate their faith?
The Greens say the White House through Obamacare has put people like them in an awful bind, that just because they own businesses, they may soon have to violate their most deeply held religious beliefs. And they find that amazing in the country that gave birth to the First Amendment. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the White House.
Ahead of tomorrow's hearing, some in the Christian community are calling for prayer. Russell Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention says this is the most important religious liberty case in decades.
Turning overseas, more than 500 Muslim Brotherhood supporters have been sentenced to death. An Egyptian court today issued the verdict in one of the largest mass trials the country has seen. All 529 sentences stem from violent riots last year by supporters of ousted Islamic President Mohamed Morsi. Some human rights attorneys say many of the sentences will be overturned on appeal, but experts say the government's crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood will continue.
CBN reporters in Jerusalem are among dozens of journalists in Israel who received threatening text messages over the weekend. The senders identified themselves as Al-Qassam, the military wing of Hamas. One message warned, Al-Qassam has chosen you to be the next Shalit. Be ready. Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier, was abducted and held in Gaza for 5 years. Another message read, if Gaza is attacked, then the life of the Zionists will be hell. The Foreign Press Association said the recipients apparently had come from a, quote, carefully selected database set up by the military wing of Hamas.
Ukrainian leaders are concerned a Russian attack on their country is near. Russia annexed Crimea last week, and thousands of troops remain massed at Ukraine's eastern border. The U.S. has been talking tough to Russia for several weeks, but as John Wagi explains, the situation on the ground may soon require more than talk.
In Kiev, nervous weekend demonstrators waved Ukrainian flags, hoping that the United States and Europe will go beyond words and even economic sanctions to repel the Russian invaders. While Putin's popularity soars in Moscow polls, U.S. lawmakers took verbal shots at him on the Sunday talk shows, knowing that short of war, Washington doesn't have a good hand to play.
Now, he is a bully, and we've got to call him for what he is. But this notion that some sanction is going to stop a former colonel in the KGB from his ambitions of a Russian empire is naive.
A bipartisan team from the Senate Armed Services Committee made a show of solidarity with Ukrainian leaders this weekend. One Republican suggested restoring missile defense agreements in Europe, canceled during President Obama's first term.
I believe that we should revisit the decision that President Obama made when he came into office with regard to the missile defense systems in Poland and the Czech Republic.
But that wouldn't do much for the people of Ukraine, who watched Russian troops take 2 Crimean military bases by force over the weekend. The crisis prompted a meeting between President Obama and European leaders in the Netherlands, as the Russian leader shatters illusions about friendly commerce between Moscow and the West.
And I think one of the things President Putin is going to regret the most is that by his actions, he has stirred up an entire continent. He has stirred up countries all throughout the region who have said we will never be dependent on President Putin for natural gas or for energy needs or for anything else ever again.
Noble sentiments, but not enough to prevent officials Monday from installing the flag of Crimea in the Russian parliament. And there may be more flags to come if Putin sets his sight on more Ukrainian territory. John Waggy, CBN News.
The U.S. is stepping up efforts to find Joseph Kony. The military is sending aircraft and special ops troops to help hunt for the notorious Ugandan warlord. They are searching for him in remote parts of Central Africa. Kony is the fugitive leader of the Lord's Resistance Army, a group known for brutal rapes and murders, as well as the use of child soldiers. Kony gained world attention after a video called Kony 2012 went viral. It highlights the atrocities Kony and the LRA commit. Nearly 100 million people have watched that video on YouTube.
Coming up, a look at why some are worried that keeping their flood insurance could end up costing them their homes. More than 100 people are missing or unaccounted for following a massive mudslide in Washington state. At least 8 people are dead. And as the clock keeps ticking, searchers are losing hope of finding anyone else alive. Charlene Aaron reports.
Rescue crews worked through the night, digging through mud at least 15 feet deep in some areas.
The conditions are very, very muddy. In places, it is still like quicksand. Other areas are they're just not accessible at this time.
Authorities believe the slide was caused by recent heavy rain. At least 30 homes were destroyed or damaged, buried when the side of the mountain came crashing down.
Total devastation. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It reminds me of what a tornado looks like when it's touched the ground.
There really is no stick standing in the path of the slide.
The mud covers about 1 square mile. Some victims were able to get out on their own. Sean Wright quickly went from being a victim to a first responder when he heard people crying for help.
Screams. People sounded at one point. I heard a baby scream.
Wright and several other people were able to use chainsaws to get the mother and baby out of the remains of their home.
Where we got her was just debris. You couldn't tell anything was houses. It was just all debris.
Crews have not been able to search the entire area of debris, only the areas determined to be safe enough to move across. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
The rising cost of flood insurance is raising an alarm for property owners all over the United States, and it's leaving as many as 1 million policyholders at the mercy of both natural and political forces. George Thomas has that story.
Michael and Lori Portanova are lifelong residents of Jersey Shore, a river town in central Pennsylvania. They bought a row of 19th century shops planning to open a riverfront inn, cafe and boat rental business. But those plans recently came to an end. The Portanovas found flood insurance premiums on 2 of their buildings had soared. They used to be less than $3,000. Now, more than $40,000 a year.
We'll just have to walk away. I mean, there's just no way that we could afford $40,000 a year.
Thousands of Americans are facing similar situations. The premium increase is part of a 2012 reform aimed at helping the National Flood Insurance Program recover from a $24 billion debt. The shortfall was created by discounts and a series of catastrophic events, including Hurricane Katrina and Superstorm Sandy. And although Congress is seeking to ease fears by rolling back that reform, many say the damage is done.
It's going to turn the towns that are on the river into ghost towns because nobody's going to want to pay that. Nobody's going to want to live here. Property values are going to plummet.
National Flood Insurance Program data shows communities in every state will suffer from price hikes, making entire communities unaffordable and unmarketable. For now, policyholders can only hope rates stay low long enough for Congress to overhaul the program when it is up for renewal in 2017. George Thomas, CBN News.
Up next, he's been called a modern-day Nostradamus because his novels have a tendency to come true. We'll talk with Joel Rosenberg when we come back.
He's He's written thrillers about Israel and international showdowns in the Middle East. But in his new book, best-selling author Joel Rosenberg is looking to the past.
He's focusing on one of the darkest chapters in history. Take a look.
During World War II, 11 million people were rounded up and taken to concentration camps all over Europe. 6 million of these were Jews, and an estimated 1 million of them died here at Auschwitz, the Nazi concentration camp complex in Poland. Inspired by true stories of those who were captured and sent to the death camps, Joel C. Rosenberg's new novel, The Auschwitz Escape, gives a glimpse of the horrors that existed behind those prison walls and the courage needed not only to survive a death camp, but to break free and tell the world the truth.
Horrible images there. Well, Wendy Griffith recently talked with Joel Rosenberg, and here's what he had to say.
And Joel joins us now for more on his exciting new book. This is a departure for you, Joel, in your normal fiction writing. Why a novel about the Holocaust?
I went with some pastor friends of mine to Auschwitz, to the Nazi death camp in southern Poland in November of 2011. We'd never been before. We thought it was pretty important, me obviously from a Jewish background, standing in a gas chamber, looking at ovens, thinking how could this have happened, and how are, the freedom to be able to do that now. But it was just a surreal experience for anybody. It certainly was for me. But as I left there, I learned that more than 800 people tried to escape from Auschwitz, but only a handful of people got out. Well, I didn't know anybody had gotten out. I can imagine people trying to get out.
Yeah.
So when I got home, I started doing research. And I discovered about these 4 specific men who 70 years ago next month escaped.
Oh my goodness.
And I thought, I got to learn more about this. And as I did, I thought, these books are out of print or nobody knows about them. I didn't know about it. How could I sort of get people to think about this and draw them in and sort of help them remember the history of the Holocaust? And so that's what led to the novel.
Joel, are we as a culture at risk of forgetting these horrible events of the Holocaust?
We are. And I think Americans fear that we are heading into darker times. I mean, I think that it's important that we teach ourselves, each other, but also particularly our young people, what happened. This was just our parents and grandparents' generation, where a leader rose in Europe and tried to kill every Jew on the planet, and put them in ovens, put them in gas chambers, use their flesh, their skin to make lampshades. I mean, it's so horrible. But there's also some stories of great hope. First, these stories. This is the greatest escape story in human history, how these men got out.
Yeah.
And while it's fiction, it's inspired by the real details. How my characters get out is exactly the same way that the men really did get out.
That's really the inspiration, because like you said, very few people escape, but the ones who did, they inspire this book.
That's right. And 4 men in particular.
And they're true stories.
In a sense, I mean, I fictionalized their names because I didn't want to put words or thoughts into their heads or mouths that I couldn't verify was really true.
Did you interview them?
No, they've all passed.
Okay.
But I did interview people that had met with them, scholars at the Israel Yad Vashem Holocaust Research Center.
Right.
They knew these men, and so I was able to talk to them. The 4 men's names I want to start to publicize: Rudolf Verba, Fred Wetzler, Arnost Rosen, and Czeslaw Mordowitz. I write more about that on my blog, but these are heroes. There were also some Christian heroes that I weave into the book. In a little French town called Le Chambon, a group of pastors, evangelical Protestant pastors, that started to rescue Jews. And they rallied their whole little town of 3,000 people. In the end, they saved more than 5,000 people, most of them Jews, most of them children.
Very few people have been to Auschwitz. You said you actually walked through the camp.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind when you were there, Joel?
It's surreal. As I said, it's hard to describe the emotions of being, especially as a Jew, but really as anybody who goes there. But one of the things that struck me was not just about what happened, but I think about our own country. 55 million babies have been aborted in America.
Right.
We're getting close in the next year or two. If this doesn't stop, we'll hit 60 million American babies that we have murdered. Now, that'll be 10 times, we'll have murdered 10 times more people in our country than Hitler murdered of the Jews. We know the judgment that came on Nazi Germany, and we think it was justified.
Yeah.
what do we think is going to happen? Unless we repent, unless we see a third great awakening, we'll have killed 10 times more people.
This is an amazing book, The Auschwitz Escape. It's hot off the press. Joel, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Wendy.
And you want to get a hold of this, it's available wherever books are sold.
Up next, a soldier comes home to meet his fiancée for the first time. You've probably seen many before. Soldiers' homecomings are usually happy occasions.
And one recent New York homecoming was no exception, but it did have a slight twist. Army Specialist Joe Gardner returned home after a 21-month deployment. While serving in Korea, he met Lindsay on Match.com. After falling in love online, he popped the question via Skype. And for the last year, their communication has taken place exclusively online. This is the first time Joe has seen his fiancée in person.
I was so excited to get off the plane and meet her in person for the first time.
It's great because I've spent a year just staring at a computer screen, you know, with our Skype conversations and everything. So now to have him home, words just can't explain how happy I am.
After meeting his fiancée, Joe right away met her parents. Well, hopefully this is a love story with a happy ending. You hope that parent reunion or meeting went okay.
That was a smart move to
That
meet
could be a
them
little
next.
tricky.
Yeah, right. That's all for this edition of NewsWatch.
Thanks for watching. Have a good night.